Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural Beers on the Balcony podcast, an in-depth insight into our clients' journeys, past, present, and future. I'm your host, Andrew Collier, and as you can see, we're not currently on the Method balcony, unfortunately. COVID restrictions means I'm still up in the Sunshine Coast, so we are going virtual today, which is totally okay because we've had plenty of practice with this over the last 18 months or so. We do have beer, though, which is obviously very important. A very special welcome to our guest, Sam Granleese, who is the head of product for JigSpace, a company that specializes in augmented 3D reality presentations, and they're doing some pretty awesome things over here. And they've got some exciting news to share later in the show. So, Sam, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
No problem. Good to be with you.
What beer are you drinking today, my friend?
I am. I'm drinking this beer. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce it right, but it's called Monsuta. And it's like a Japanese draft beer, and we literally stumbled upon this the other day, and it's the second six-pack that's come home now. So, cheers to you, mate.
Cheers, mate. I've got in my hands a Balter Hazy IPA. Just hold that up for everyone to see. Us Kiwis, we love a hazy ale, mate. So yeah, let's get stuck in, and we'll see if we can't finish these before the pod's finished.
Yeah, the Balter guys make some nice beers.
They do. I've got a very soft spot for the goat.
Oh, yeah.
The black on black one.
Yep.
Yeah,
yep.
I'm a big fan of that.
Design.
I think
the design.
Oh yeah, they're awesome.
Great too.
Yeah, they're so cool. I'm pretty sure it was top 5 best beers of 2020 in the countdown that they did last year. So nice. Shout out to the goat.
Yeah.
All right, so just to kind of contextualize the conversation for the viewers today, mate, can you give us a bit of an understanding about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name's Sam Granleese. I am the head of product at JigSpace, and I wear a bunch of hats there because we're a startup. So I'm also head of growth at the moment, and as we grow our business, I'm doing less and less of that work, fortunately. And so growth essentially covers commercialization. So building out, the business part of the product. So we work in spatial technology. So a lot of our early work was very much kind of deep tech engineering work, and it's only later that we sort of really started commercializing the platform. So JigSpace is a platform for creating and sharing interactive 3D presentations for anything. So Canva for 3D is how we sometimes pitch if we get stuck in an elevator. What that kind of means
cool
is,
pitch, man.
Yeah, yeah, it's a big vision that we've got, and we're slowly kind of building little, bits and pieces sort of on top of that. But I guess our vision is that we're building a future essentially that we want people to be able to look at anything, and if they ask a question like, how does that work? How can I fix that? The knowledge is like immediately available to them right in front of them in whatever device they use. And today that's mobile devices, but the industry is rapidly moving towards some very accessible, new interfaces. So heads-up displays, glasses, and things like that. So, and so that's what JigSpace is. We make it really easy to make content in that space. Traditionally, 3D tools are very professional and very industry specific. So if you are a mechanical engineer and you work for Volkswagen, for example, you'd use a very specific type of CAD design tool to do that. If you're an architect, you use very specific 3D CAD design tools to do that thing. If you're an animator making media, movies, ads or something, you use very specific tools to do that. And so what that kind of means is it's very hard to share information across teams, and it's very inaccessible to non-technical people to play in that space as well. So for example, reviewing content as a marketer, if someone's made it for you, you're typically getting a JPEG in a PowerPoint when someone sends, or an email, to say here's a copy of something.
Don't I know it?
Yeah, right. So so that's kind of the industry that we live in. We've come from where there's all these kind of deep verticals of expertise and tools and ecosystems that are 30 plus years old in these silos that don't really talk to each other, that have only recently started even getting kind of cloud oriented. They're very much on-premise, on-device only kind of things. And the founders of JigSpace, and I'd say over half of our team have all got backgrounds in video games, which is the kind of opposite of those worlds, because video games are all about real-time rendering. And so we've basically tried to solve what's sort of a fairly deep technical problem with something that is very consumer user-friendly, which is immersive experiences, because that's the interface that everyone, most people are now very used to and have got used to over the last 20 years through playing games and more and more kind of going through virtual worlds and things like that. So that's what JigSpace is. It's a really exciting platform. We've recently raised a Series A to kind of build our growth engine. Essentially, we started 5 years ago as obviously a bootstrap startup, and only recently went through a few seed rounds over the last couple of years, and then the Series A just recently. And that journey was kind of a really interesting one of the founders kind of finding their feet, figuring out what the right market, the right steps of market were for their kind of vision, and because the vision's quite far away in terms of achievement, because it's nascent technology. Like we're trying to kind of sequence our journey with some realistic steps without burning through too much cash. And like the industry, like the 3D industry, particularly when it comes to virtual reality in particular, is just littered with corpses of startups that had great ideas and went too fast or went too hard in certain things. So kind of the pacing of what everyone knows is some inevitable future, and the steps towards that is one of the challenges in our industry, and something to date that we've I think navigated pretty well. And that's probably because like a key thing that we've always had true, that we really try and instill in new people now that are joining us, is this idea of utility, and trying to make sure that whatever we do has some like a strong sense of utility with people that are using it. Otherwise, you can stray very hard into the gimmicky part of 3D and VR and AR, because it's kind of cool to see and touch initially, but if somebody's not interested after 5 minutes, there's no purpose to it. And we're not building value. So that's something that we've kind of focused on from the beginning, and now kind of find ourselves, I think, in a really good position where the use cases for what people want to do in terms of sharing 3D knowledge, 3D information, are becoming more and more real to people. COVID really accelerated that for us, in particular with a lot of our two biggest user groups are basically people that make 3D things, so manufacturers of things, and schools and teachers. So obviously they went to remote learning, so they were looking for new, interesting ways to do immersive learning and engaging form factors. And JigSpace on an iPad or the phone, if you're a kid, is like just a great 1 hour little exercise to go and build something and make something and share it with your classmates or with your teacher. Learn about something scientific, historic, for example. And obviously if you make things in 3D, so if you're a manufacturer, you've got to train a bunch of people that are in 10 different locations, and you can't take them all to a traditional work environment or an experience center or something. It was very difficult to kind of take them through complex information. So we got a really good kick, I guess, from the move to kind of remote first work, and that I guess spurned a lot of the activity that was happening with us last year.
It's really interesting, man. It was one of the first questions that I had actually for you when I was in one of our first meetings. It was kind of for people who are unfamiliar with how this actually works, kind of on face value. It's effectively a hologram of sorts, isn't it? Yeah. Can you dive into that in a bit more detail?
Yeah, so it's not the only way that people use our product, but it's one of the kind of really standout features of it is the augmented reality element of it. And augmented reality is where you basically, and there's lots of applications of augmented reality, but it's basically the blending of something real, typically viewed through a camera, like on your phone, for example, and then some digital information over the top that is contextually aware or relevant to what you're looking at. So the classic phone example is Pokemon Go, because most people kind of have an idea of what that was and it still is as a game, where you're kind of collecting digital characters and coins, and it's a game, but it is only really understandable through the camera and the application of that, and being able to see these virtual things through your phone, for example, that aren't there in real life. But so that was Pokemon Go is almost 5 years old now, but when that came out, that really as a common kind of concept that almost everyone was aware of from ages 6 to 86, kind of had some degree of understanding of. But augmented reality is actually very broad as a concept, because it's essentially this idea of some sort of digital content, visual or audio, that is complementary to something in the real world. So, and people, it's mostly kind of visual, but there's a lot of media started to move into the audio space as well, particularly with Apple's AirPods Pro kind of products that have a spatial audio framework to them. And that's, obviously in movie and films and things like that. If you watch Disney Plus on an iPad now, and you've got AirPod Pros or AirPod Pro Maxes, you can move around that screen, like, and you go and get a coffee and come back and you're watching it, and you are moving around that.
I got to check that out.
It's really cool, and there wasn't a lot of press or PR about it when Apple released that. They just sort of did a little update saying, there's now selected titles, but so there's Apple sort of slowly building these little things in there. But the music streaming services are kind of working on all of that stuff at the moment to make it's the next level up from Dolby 5.1, so to speak. And then the other common things in AR is really utilitarian ideas like wayfinding in maps. Whether that's when you're driving your car and you can see a blended view of what's in front of you, and then some digitized navigational controls, or whether you're using Google Maps on your phone and you have that AR view where you're kind of looking up Street View and it's kind of saying, well, keep going 100 meters and there's a big giant arrow pointing you down a laneway. So there's like some very simple things like that. The AR that typically people use with our software is for visualizing steps and products and things. So that can be here's a medical device, for example. Here's an ultrasound machine, and here's the 10 steps of how to switch it on, change a battery, do a pre-check. But normally, if you were in a hospital and had that machine and had someone there instructing you how to do it, you would do a hands-on with it. But if you weren't in that situation, which is a very common learning environment now, to be doing something in isolation or to be doing it somewhere where you don't have equipment, that you can simulate that exact same experience and have the same movement, the same ability to interact with it as if it's actually there in front of you. And simulated learning there's a strong history of research in that space of simulated learning being much more superior than traditional kind of learning through reading, dialogue tests, like the kind of more traditional learning framework. So simulated learning and simulated training, which is what, again, augmented reality and virtual reality technology is a big driver of, is very effective once you've got the content and can do it. Now, we didn't invent any of that, but the one thing that we do that is sort of our key positioning is we make it really easy to make content for that purpose. And over the last 10 years, as VR's moved from being experimental to being quite mainstream, where you can buy an Oculus headset for a few $100 from Facebook, is that the hardware's become really cheap, but the ability to make content is still really difficult. You need to have background in 3D design, you need to kind of have a pretty good idea about actually putting tech together, and you need to, so whether or not you're an actual engineer or not, like it's very difficult to actually make content.
Case in point, you guys being a bit of a trailblazer in this space in the local and overseas market now. Don't have a huge amount of competition right now in this particular area, do you?
No, and that's part of our challenge is basically, there's a whole heap of competitors that are in that professional space where there are people that know what they're trying to do and they just try every tool and they'll pick the best tool to do the job. But it's a very small market, and what we're focused on is the people that don't even know that they can do this stuff themselves. So we look at a lot of parallels in tech history, like the introduction of PowerPoint in the 80s, and more recently things like Canva versus Photoshop, where a lot of people would never count themselves as a designer, but they might find themselves in a social media management role, and all of a sudden they can put together a post pretty easily using a couple of assets that are given to them in Canva, and all of a sudden, the Instagram account that they manage, or the email newsletters that they have to put out every week starts looking really, really good, and they haven't ever touched Photoshop.
I can imagine
that, right? So it's a similar thing where a lot of people don't know that they can do that because they don't know the tools are now available to make them do a good enough job. And that's part of our that's like something we haven't, again, it's kind of a bootstrap startup. Until recently we didn't have the resources to really market and go out there and do that, like, and find those people. And that's now one of those really kind of cool phases of the company that we're about to start on, is hiring up that team, and which we're halfway through doing, but hiring that team and getting the Jig story out there for those people. Yeah,
and that segues quite nicely into the really exciting kind of afterburners phase that you've recently kind of put yourselves into. Tell me how that came about, and just how much funding that you've secured, and what your plans are for it.
So we're quite fortunate to have some really supportive seed investors who've come back again and kind of led the round. So we've got a mix of Australian and US investors. Our lead Australian investors are Rampus and Investable. And we've got a few prominent seed investors from the States, like the Boost VC Fund and General Catalyst. But this round, which kind of really started like the early stage of that, started after we were in the Apple iPhone 12 keynote, because it was such a big event. We had just a huge influx of interest and customers, and
that's
and
massive
sort of stuff.
That is just remarkable. Was that a contact of Zach's, or the fact that, because they approached you, right? It wasn't the other way around. Am I right in saying that?
We've had a good relationship with Apple for several years. Like, we were, I think, one of the first products they featured when they released ARKit, which is the Apple developer ecosystem for augmented reality. And actually, like, and we've focused very heavily on Apple's ecosystem as well. Not from the beginning, and when Jig started, we were kind of everywhere. We had, like, web viewers and a HoloLens app for the HoloLens 1, and VR was kind of spread really thin across everything. And Apple released ARKit, and the vision of where that was going, and Apple's typical commitment to developer ecosystems, like gave the founders, like, that kind of assurance that we need to, like, double down on this platform and just kind of get rid of everything for now. And that's been quite successful in terms of, I think, that the focus on that one type of user, that form factor of touch, and kind of Apple's distribution, kind of, that you can get through the App Store if you do have something that is quite compelling for users. That like really helped us stay focused and not be spread across 10 different platforms, which is sort of the risk in this space, is having to kind of maintain a high quality product in half a dozen different development environments. It's really impossible with a small team. So due to that, the product has always been very it's a bit of a symbiotic relationship, I guess. Like it's good for them, it's good for us.
Absolutely.
And so we've had a good relationship with them for a long time, and have had like the not the right word is, but essentially, yeah, we've had the the benefit and the privilege really of being featured by them on multiple occasions, and like the one last year was huge because the iPhone 12 is it's probably it's an extra big year for them. Like the 12, it's a little bit like the 6 was a long time ago, a bit of a super cycle of handset releases where in a year's time probably everyone's going to have either a 12 or 13, so it's sort of a big change, and so to be featured as part of that, particularly for the area that we are very kind of forward thinking on, which is 3D content capture through your device, which is one of the big next generational things that all these devices are starting to do. Was great. And so that kind of kicked off that all of the discussions about, well, what does that mean? Is now the time to really invest in the product for growth. And we closed it just recently. There was some media about that, and we've just been hiring like madmen ever since. So I think we had about 12 people in the team about 3 months ago, and we by the end of this month we'll have 25, 26. So we've kind of more than doubled in size. And so and like a small number obviously internally have been, I'd say, hiring 20 hours a week at least, just interviews galore basically. And that's been really exciting. It's forced us to really think about the company and the culture that we're building, because to date, and like I'm not a really early employee. I was, I think, maybe number 10. So but there'd been a lot of time to hire the right people, or through networks or friends or whatever, to have like a really great kind of core little culture. But when you kind of go to scale and you've got to make decisions really quickly, and you don't have that same amount of time to think about that stuff, like we had to come up with some new systems and really codify a lot of the things that were valuable to us and important to us, and then figure out how to identify that in people that we'd never met before, that had just submitted an application through a website. So very, very different to what we'd previously been doing, but it's been really exciting, like just to have all these extra people that have all this extra expertise and knowledge that we don't have, and just the capacity now to do so much more in the same amount of time.
And it's amazing you've grown so quickly in a market that is so competitive right now. I mean, it must help having a fairly unique sell in this particular market, and that there are, just being on the other side of the fence, there are so many companies coming to us and say, we just can't hire direct, we can't find people direct, we need you. So having that kind of novel, it's almost a novel sell in a way that, we are, one of the pioneers in this particular space. Check out some of our partners, check out the seed funding that we're just going through. All the ingredients are there for someone who doesn't know this product to go, all right, let's give this a shot. This is so exciting.
Yeah, I think we were quite surprised. I think that we've been, relatively successful in hiring so far, like in that environment, because we certainly, with some of the roles, it has been quite challenging, particularly, Unity development, because there's a couple massive game studios just doing some big games at the moment, like, and hiring hundreds of people, like I think Medal of Honor and a few other like globally big games are currently being made in Melbourne, and so that kind of there's been a few roles and things that have been somewhat challenging to do, but at the same time, we've never been short on ambition, and we do put that out there about what we're trying to build, and over the next 5-10 years, and what that means if you come in at employee number 13, 14, 15, and your ability to both learn a lot as we grow, but also to have an outsized impact on the business is, like, I think if you worked anywhere for a couple of years, like you really understand the difference between having an impact in a team or on a company versus just being a cog in the machine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And and like, I think most startups actually do have the ability to give someone that experience, but it's often not, maybe it's not merchandised well or sold in to people in the right way. I'm not sure, but I think like that's certainly something that we have looked for a lot in people, but also like really put out there as like, you know, we're looking for someone that will teach us how to do stuff. You know, like we don't know half of what we're doing any day of the week, and the whole point of that is we're trying to hire more
the fun, right?
Yeah, we're trying to hire more people that are complementary. And will add have an additive effect to the business and to the team. And that's something like our co-founders have really like nurtured and really pushed into everyone, is like one of our kind of core values, is that like everyone's got an obsession with learning and being curious about things, and we really, like, I don't know, it's a bit of a cliche, but like everyone's like really humble and just like happily every day we'll have someone, you know, who's got half their experience, teach them how to do something, and we'll find that kind of quite quite exciting, I think. And I certainly haven't worked in places like that are that open as much as this. So I think like I hope anyway. I hope that has sort of come across a lot when we've been hiring people and chatting to them, because it's been really interesting. It's been hard. It's been hard on the numbers game, like of just the relentlessness of going through CVs and interviewing and you know, re-interviewing and doing all that sort of stuff. But I think, but as I said earlier, I think we really honed that over the first couple of weeks at least of this process, and in the end, I think we've come out of it as a better company as well, because it's really solidified and codified that.
It certainly helps with the sell when you've got a CEO who's virtually a bona fide movie star after that. Was it that Verizon, Verizon advert? That was pretty cool.
That was funny.
Yeah, and that must be nice to be able to send out to candidates and go, look, we can tell you, but let's also show you.
That's like, it's actually like it's a product in our product marketing. That's like a tagline we use, but it's also something we believe in a lot of work too, like showing, not telling. So yeah, when we've been trying to hire people, we try to show them as much as possible. Like we look for people that have that mentality. So you know, people that, for example, like it's really interesting. Someone that interviews for a role that hasn't used your product, when you have a product that's kind of freely downloadable, is always interesting, and typically doesn't bode well. You know, if someone sort of hasn't even bothered to kind of look at it, and obviously not all
research kids.
Yeah, not all companies can do that, particularly if you're in the B2B space, and the best you can do is book a demo. But it's surprising, that a lot of people wouldn't do that either. But yeah, we have a kind of a pretty strong focus on you know, simplicity and showing something rather than spending 15 minutes trying to describe it. Like, just share a screen, draw on a piece of paper, like you know, like a sort of practical way of thinking about things.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Let's take it back to the beginning if we can. I'm really interested to understand a little bit more about kind of Sam Granleese 15, 20, 30 years ago. Did you have an understanding of what you wanted to be in high school?
Not really.
No?
Don't know if anyone did. I mean, I'm sure I did at the time, and I'd probably erased that part of my memory now. But when I was getting, I guess, towards the later years of high school, like we had to do, kind of have to think about that. I mean, I still harbored like dreams of being like a music journalist or something.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to be the kid in Almost Famous going on the tour bus. You know what I mean?
Man.
And I didn't, when I was in, I think it was year 10, I did an internship at Juice magazine in Sydney. I was a kid from the country, and all the internships you had this sort of time of the year where you didn't have a lot of study going on just before you started year 11, and you had to kind of walk. You could either there's like a list of businesses you could go and be an intern at, and like in a very small country town where I grew up, that was like the local accountant, the local butcher shop, the real estate agent, like just
Yeah.
not
Where'd
not
you
a
grow
lot of
up?
so I grew up in country New South Wales. I'm in a town called Temora, which is about
Tomorrow. Okay.
an hour north of Wagga Wagga, sort of, so southern New South Wales.
What's the population?
4,000 people.
Yeah, small.
Farming community. I grew up on a farm, and like.
So did I.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereabouts did you grow up?
Rural New Zealand, central North Island, about an hour south of Lake Taupo. So
Okay.
possibly the furthest part of New Zealand from the coast, I'd say.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
A lot of cows.
But a lot of cows, a lot of sheep, a lot of birds. It's a little bit different waking up in the morning over there than it is over here.
Yeah, I feel you.
Yeah.
So I didn't have ambitions to work in agriculture. Obviously, otherwise I'd still be there.
Yeah.
But yeah,
did you get the hard word from your parents at all? Or your grandparents?
No,
I got the
really.
hard word
Like
from my grandparents.
No, like my parents are really supportive of us doing like whatever made us happy, really. Like they were so open-minded about everything. And like my dad was actually a lawyer, but he was a share farmer with his brother and our neighbours. So we were really weekend farmers.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Kind
The
of best of
actual
both
labour
worlds.
we were doing. Yeah, the labour we would actually do as a family on the farm was weekends and the occasional after school thing. Like it wasn't the main living. And my mum was a
like hobby farmers.
Owner. Hobby farmers. Oh, it was a decent farm. It was about 3,000 acres, but
That's a bit bigger than a hobby farm.
Yeah, but like share farmers, so we didn't own any equipment. Like the neighbours would crop it for us. We ran livestock mostly, so the thing we were most involved in was about 3,000 sheep, and breeding about 1,000 ewes every year. That's like 1,000 lambs every year. But you can kind of, and you hire shearers, you hire people to come in and do all those sort of jobs. So it was sort of, it was kind of like a hobby, but it actually didn't feel like, when I grew up there, it was a lot of hard work. Like it wasn't sort of like a 3 hours, once a week kind of thing.
Did you have lots of droughts there?
Yeah, so like it was interesting.
Was it as bad then as it is kind of has been over the last 5 or 6 years?
There was like the millennium, I think it was called the millennium drought, which was like in the late 90s, was a shocker, and it's never really recovered since then. Like everyone's now a bit used to it, but if you look back through time, you would go, no, like that, it's like what is going on now? Like there was a rule of thumb I remember growing up with, which was like you had like one good year for every 2 bad years, and the one good year should be good enough to cover the bad years. Which seems a bit crazy now, but
it does.
But I think a lot of the areas out there now are worse than that. I still remember being young and it raining a lot and having like really wet winters and it being really green in winter, but then really hot in summer. And most of the time now it's sort of dry and occasionally wet in winter and cold, and then like just extremely hot in summer. So it's definitely harder. It's a harder farming environment than it used to being. It's obviously climate change, but yeah, it was an interesting existence growing up in that environment of some like in the whole town lived and breathed on the mood of the farmers. Like
don't know it.
It was a bad year, right? Like if you whatever business you were in, if you had a retail business or you were a builder, like there'd be no business for you either because half the economy was the farms. And like people would be on 12 months of credit because they hadn't made any money that year. And anyway, it was an interesting time, and it certainly turned me off being in that industry. And I was fortunate enough to grow up in the to be in high school in the late 90s when everyone sort of started getting a computer at home, and I was just incredibly curious and interested in tech. Probably from a fairly young age, but like definitely from kind of that sort of onset of high school. And I just remember like when we got internet at home, like on dial-up, and I was just obsessed trying to learn everything I could about either making websites or hacking together, getting bits and upgrading the computer and all that sort of stuff. And
were you ever sporting at school? Were you ever into ball sports or?
I lived in a country town, so that was all you did. Like,
yeah,
it was weird to be in
AFL or rugby.
So Temora is it's a rugby league town, but it's got this thing. It's got this thing that a lot of towns have, where like country towns have, where the town population is mostly into like one sport, and then the kind of farming population into a different one. And in Temora, it was very much the agricultural sort of part of town was into Australian rules, and the town was the rugby league sort of town. So I actually played AFL. All my mates played AFL because we all sort of went to the school that a lot of the farming families went to. And so yeah, I played AFL kind of my whole life, and and cricket and tennis were really my main staples. And like cricket's still the sport I follow the most. But yeah, played AFL, and that was a lot of fun. Doing that. But you just play everything in a country town. Like in high school, we like half of the boys were playing AFL and half of them were playing rugby league, and we'd go and play rugby union against another town, and none of us knew the rules. We'd sort of we'd split the roles between the rugby guys would be the forwards, and the AFL guys would all be the backs, and we'd be doing giant kicks to each other and marking and stuff like it was just making do.
So obviously being in Melbourne, you'd have to follow an AFL team then. Who do you support?
I still support the Swans. Like
You still Swans? Okay.
I had some family friends when I was very young, like really try and turn me into a Bombers supporter, and I was into the Bombers for a couple of years, but it didn't really last. So I was really into the Swans, and when I moved to Sydney, like to go to uni and kind of start working, I used to go and watch the Swans probably like 7 or 8 times a year. Like, so I'd go to a lot of games and really enjoy that. And I just haven't really. And like Melbourne's a town you can support the Swans in pretty well, because there's still a pretty strong, following down here. So, and there's a game every other week here that Sydney plays in. So yeah.
So you were pretty into the technology piece when you were younger. Right up as early as high school. How then did you, because when you first, I guess, joined the commercial industry, it seems like you straddled that line of kind of digital marketing and product in your first few roles, as opposed to hardcore tech.
Yeah, I never did like in high school, stuff like that. I studied IT, like probably every second person did, because it was like just this thing that you just felt like you had to do, because that was the next big thing that was happening in the world. And but I didn't go to uni and do computer science or anything. But when I was in school, like I did part-time business making websites, because you could charge like $300 to make a 4-page website for someone, and there was no site builders back then, apart from GeoCities or one of those kind of things, which were horrible. And so I kind of learned HTML and a couple really basic things like that. How to set up a hosting and DNSs and just like really basic kind of early stuff. So I was into it for that much, but I never had that kind of motivation to like be that technical all the time. And I don't know what it is. I know some people like that sort of that minute kind of engineering problem solving part of it. I was sort of more interested in the user part and the business part of it than the actual technology itself, like all the frameworks and the languages and all that sort of stuff. So I never went and studied it, but I was always really into business and marketing and just being entrepreneurial generally. So I went when I went to uni, I went and did an advanced diploma. Actually, I enrolled in an international relations degree at Macquarie, because it felt like a smart thing to do. I got pretty good grades, but I was just never really. I remember like thinking about it close to like finishing I did an advanced diploma, and I could have gone and gone back and started that other degree, and I was just like I just couldn't picture myself sort of 3 or 4 years later with that degree and what meaning it would have. And whilst I'd been doing this marketing diploma, I'd done an internship with the record label, and we were doing like a bunch of different things. It was a really fun group of small people, like a small group of people doing some really fun stuff. And I just thought, I think I'm good. This is enough. Like I'd learned already by then that most of the stuff you learn, like that I was interested in, you tend to learn on the job or just through your own, doggedness, like wanting to know something rather than kind of having to kind of learn it through some sort of factory learning exercise. So at that point, like I got my piece of paper and I just went, I'm going to go and do stuff. So I worked for like a little entertainment business where we made like an interactive DVD product. And then I kind of started my own out of that as a little side hustle. So we were making interactive pub trivia, which was kind of, it's just interesting, like compared to what I do now. But this was in 2004 to 2006. But back then, like it was quite challenging to make a DVD, for example, like to encode it. And we essentially figured out a way to make that pretty easy. And we were basically doing pub trivia and syndicating it out to a bunch of pubs, so licensing content that we're making. And this was pre-Spicks and Specs and Rock Quiz, but it was essentially the same sort of thing, like music trivia, pop trivia, and but it was interactive with music. We got licensing deals from the record labels, so we could use their music in our shows, and they sponsored us. They gave us CDs and merch that we could give out, so that we could go to a pub and say, pay us $300, and like you'll get a show basically. And they'd either have a host or we would do it ourselves. And it was a really good side business. Like we never did it full time, but it was kind of like somewhere between $500 to $1,000 a week, like that we could like me. It was just me and a mate of mine just doing it. It was a really cool little business.
It's a good little hustle.
Yeah, but it was like a lot of work. Like it was. I'd be out like 2 or 3 nights a week at a pub hosting trivia, and then like doing.
Did you drink lots?
No, not really. But like I was a really nervous public speaker growing up, and it really made me get over that. And having a couple of beers and just talking to random people and having to make 2 hours of interesting, like being on stage in front of 50 or 100 people doing, talking about just random things.
It's amazing what a bit of liquid courage does.
Yeah, for sure. So like that was just one of these entrepreneurial things, and then I the first kind of proper job that I had, like, was I don't know if the music job would really count. Was like I joined a little telco and met this founder who ran like a little B2B telco, and we came up with an idea to start a country-based B2B telco because at the time Telstra had a monopoly in regional Australia, and people were really poorly served out there, and a lot of the foundational wholesale services have been made available to companies to kind of build businesses on top of. So we started like a new telco, like a mobile virtual network operator. We're kind of basically running and started setting up franchises and things in the country. I did that for a couple of years, but I sort of had a falling out with the founder, I guess, and I was really inexperienced at commercial things, and I'd really hadn't done my due diligence and had basically done a bad deal for myself. And when I tried to kind of rectify that or fix it up, like the other founder who was very much more senior than me, like had been in the industry for 30, 40 years, like just didn't want to budge, and I was like, I'm 22, I'm going to bail on you. So I just disappeared. Like I lost a bit of money, and that like kind of burnt my fingers a bit for a while of like doing anything really risky. And I was kind of lucky from that point that at least that I knew a lot about digital technology at that point, because I'd done a lot of this kind of telco technical stuff and had just sort of always been around technology. So I ended up getting a job in advertising and digital media, which in the mid-2000s was a pretty interesting place. And through a friend I went to uni with was at an agency called OMD, and they were just looking for people that, like, again, there was no like experience you could have really at the time. Like it was like, oh, you need to have 2 years of experience doing search or something like that. It was just like, we're kind of looking for outcasts or black sheep that are kind of interested in technology. You've got some degree of experience. Maybe you've made websites before, but you kind of need to figure everything out as you go, kind of people. And so yeah, I got a job, and then ended up in advertising for 4 years. Worked at a couple of agencies. Ended up moving to Melbourne with the other one. Met my wife at that agency, and then I decided to get out of the industry and kind of move sideways, essentially, into digital publishing. And so I joined a scale-up business at the time, which was a digital publisher called Crikey, and Smart Company, and a few other publications. It was essentially a joint venture between a bunch of journalists who'd all left their masters and started their own publications. Alan Kohler's Business Spectator and all that sort of stuff. And I joined there in sort of a role doing strategy, commercialization, product, all sorts of stuff like that. And that was really fun. So a couple of years, one of the businesses got bought out by News Corp. I didn't want to join News Corp, so I stayed on for a little bit more with the remaining couple of businesses, and ended up getting tapped on the shoulder by someone I knew at carsales.com, and ended up over there. And I was at carsales for a long time from that point. And at that point, I'd sort of had an interesting enough for them anyway background in media and kind of product commercialization, the advertising product sort of space in particular, as well as just kind of that ability to kind of build and grow things when there isn't really a clear path of how to do that. I don't know how else to describe what you do when you're in those sort of early stage product and growth type roles. Like people say, oh, we want 10 years of experience and something like that. But really, you're kind of looking for a personality and a record of making something out of nothing almost. And yeah, so I spent a long time at carsales. I joined carsales doing analytics, strategy, product support, and things like that. And then after, I was there for quite a while before I actually went into a full-time product role, and ended up running like the commercial product team, which was analytics, AI, actual PMs, design, and stuff like that for the B2B part of the business. So yeah, and
Sam, we're going to
have a lot there.
Yeah, we're going to have to, as much as I'd love to keep talking to you about all this stuff for a long, long period of time, we're going to have to wrap things up pretty quickly. So I've just got a few quick fire questions for you before we finish things up and put a pin in it, so to speak. What would you say the biggest mistake of your career has been, and what lesson did you learn from it?
Biggest mistakes. I've probably made a lot of them. For sure. I guess I think like I've definitely mistakes, I guess. Like I don't really have like heaps of regrets, but I guess things I consider mistakes, like in hindsight, are not moving fast enough when I've got a strong gut feel about something. Like I've had a tendency a lot of the time to kind of overanalyze something or overthink things, and sometimes that gut reaction has really been, or has always been like kind of true. So like that's certainly been something. I've got funny sliding door career moments. Like one of them I remember was I used to be really involved in Wikimedia Australia, which is the foundation that runs Wikipedia. And in early 2007, we had a meeting, and there's like 10 of us, just massive nerds. And a couple of people had started working in Atlassian, and everyone's like, yeah, we've got to work at this company called Atlassian. Like they've got this wiki product, and they're like, you should come. And I was just like, no, it just sounds really boring. And anyway, that was very early into the Atlassian journey. Could have turned out very differently for me if I'd gone to join those guys. So I can think of, but like that's sort of part and parcel. I think working in technology is you have a lot of sliding door moments where you're like, well, if I'd gone and just said yes to someone that had asked me something, like, who knows where you could be, but it's fun.
What's the best piece of advice you've been given? Really putting you on the spot here now.
Yeah, I think my dad's always been has always been really supportive of like career choices, and he doesn't understand a lot of what I've ever done in my career because he's the lawyer, but he like one of the things my dad always like said was like, if you're not learning or you're not having fun, you shouldn't be like, you should get out of whatever you're doing, which is like sort of a really simple piece of advice, but I've often found like if I really think about it, when I've been in situations where I'm kind of not happy in a role and I end up leaving it or doing something new, that's always been something that's like really evident, and I just sort of haven't really grasped it, or been coming up with excuses to cover something like that. And so I think if you are really happy in your role or you're constantly learning, it's hard to not be satisfied, and at least that's sort of always been my experience. So if you can have fun while you work, or if you feel that you're constantly learning and you find that fulfilling, then that's like, I think you'll always find that you'll finish the week in a really good space, and in the long run, like, feel really satisfied with what you do.
Amen to that. Who do you look to for support and inspiration?
Probably, I mean, like my wife's like an amazing supporter of me, and she's a good counterbalance to what I do. Like we met in advertising, but she's a chef now and has such a different perspective on work life and how you apply your skills day to day in work, and what you find fulfilling and all that kind of stuff. So like most of the time, and like most commonly, it's really her, because it's such a different, like, I deal in product for something that builds, like software product development is so different to making pastry, which is what she does. Like, it's just so I find that's like really, really helpful and really inspiring to just sort of change how I think about something and get out of my own head. But I find a lot of inspiration, like, in terms of what I do as a job everywhere, whether it's on peers in other companies, or people I know that are just incredibly good at what they do. I don't know, all over the place.
Final question: what's the best leadership book you've read or listened to recently?
So I'm re-listening to what's it called? The High Growth Handbook, which is like Eli Gad, which is like great. It's I don't read a lot of business books because I don't really have time, so I listen to an audio book while I'm doing something else, and it's great. It's almost like bullet points, and it's just incredibly concise and kind of useful. So I find that one useful. It's not so much leadership, but it's, if you're working in a startup and you're doing lots of different things, it's incredibly concise. It's high level, but it's like very practical. So I find that really cool. And I like a lot of anti-leadership books, which is my word for like the books about companies that went bad. So, because for me, that's like things like not to do. So I really liked Super Pumped, like the Uber book, and Bad Blood by John Carreyrou about like the blood business. Like, it's just I like a lot of those books because I find them quite fun to read.
Awesome, man. Well, I think that's a really good place to land this thing. I've thoroughly enjoyed today's conversation, and I'd love to do it again in person next time if you're interested. Yeah,
we'll do it. Well, obviously you've got to get back down here at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll make it happen for sure. So for those interested in connecting, where can they find you, mate?
I spend way too much time than I should on Twitter, at Granleese. But you can always find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the other easiest way. If you type in Sam and JigSpace, you'll find me there.
Awesome. And when we do get to finally see each other in the flesh again, what am I buying you?
Well, it'll be whatever's on. I always like what's on tap. I've always got a strong preference for something out of a keg and not out of a bottle. So it'll be something that's on tap.
Simple, effective. Can definitely agree to that. All right, mate. Sounds like a plan to me.
Awesome. Look forward to it.
Thanks, Sam.
All right. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, mate.